Hello, we're delighted to have you here. Of all the places you could have been, I am thrilled that you're attending the annual conference of the USHLI, and we thank Juan Andrade and the staff and everyone who's made this possible. I'd like to start with a few intros so that you know who you'll be talking to, who you'll be listening to today. I myself have been with ETS for 17 years. I left and I am completely focused on helping entrepreneurs. I am a founding board member of the Lonely Entrepreneur, and our idea is to empower 100,000 Hispanic entrepreneurs to achieve their aspirations by having access to this amazing learning platform. If you want to know more about that, it's www.thelonelyentrepreneur.com. I am accompanied today by two magnificent leaders in this country. Becky Pringle, the president of NEA, and Randy Weingarten, the president of AFT-CIO. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about Becky. Becky Pringle is president of a 3 million member organization, the National Education Association. She is a fierce social justice warrior, defender of educator rights, and an unrelenting advocate for all students and communities of color. NEA addresses the inequitable and unfair policies and practices that push many of our students out of school and into the criminal justice system. And she wants to do something about that. She also happens to be the recipient of the National Peace Medal for Leader of Educational Excellence and many other things that I can't read to you, but I hope you'll read about in the information you received. Our other panelist is Randy Weingarten, president of the 1.7 million member American Federation of Teachers. And she was included in the Washingtonian of 2021, listed as one of the most influential people in our nation. Weingarten is an advocate for a new deal for higher education. She wants investment, and her aim is to create academic environments that are free of racism and other forms of bigotry. So I want to set the stage for what we're going to be talking about today. The topic we're discussing is the role of race and culture in education. So very quickly, the settlers and founders of America achieved prosperity through race-based bondage. We now understand even better than that that's the case. Indigenous people were slaughtered or displaced and relegated to a life on reservations. The 1619 Project exposed all of the rationalizations used to support a system that advantaged whites, creating prosperity through the exploitation of Black families who were bought and sold without regard to the preservation of the family unit. So more than 500 years ago, white expansion encountered the Hispanic civilization in the southwest region of what is now America. Ever since, Hispanic culture and its people have been subjected to systemic forms of racism, resulting in the loss of our land, language, and our heritage. America's history lessons have been whitewashed, however, and today there's an insistence from cohorts who soon will move from being the minority to the majority, that our status and our whole story be told. So in this vein, I'm going to start with a general question that I'll address to both panelists, and then we will do them individually. Could you, Becky, describe how you believe education ought to go about acknowledging the role of race and culture in education?
Thank you, Yvette. On behalf of the 3 million members of the National Education Association, I am so honored to participate in the United Hispanic Leadership Institute panel. I am grateful to be here with all of the participants. And I also just want to take a moment to thank Dr. Andrade and Tammy DeVores and our phenomenal moderator, you, Yvette, for your incredibly tenacious and courageous leadership, for always standing with public school students and educators. Of course, I'm glad to share this space with my ally and friend, fellow union leader and teacher, AFT President Randy Weingarten. NEA members share one goal. We want every student, everyone, each of you that are joining us here to have the access, the opportunity, and the support you need to step boldly into your magnificent brilliance. Doing that requires that you receive an education that views our nation's history with honesty. You know, my father taught history. I'm a science teacher, but he taught history. I hated history, but he made sure that he took very seriously his responsibility to not only teach his students, but to teach his three daughters, my sisters and I, about our family's ancestors, and that they experienced both pain and pride. My father's respect for truth has fueled my 3 decades of experience as a middle school teacher. Today, dozens of states have now introduced or passed laws to censor educators from talking about race and racism with their students, which means that they're denying students the right to a truthful, a complete, and an honest education. The lawmakers backing these measures want to stifle lessons that illustrate the mistakes of our nation's past and erase the legacy of leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King. Believe it or not, it's quite shocking. But these same politicians use race and zip code to deny some of our students the resources that form the foundation of what we know to be a high quality education. Their efforts to stoke these fears and to try to rewrite history diminish the injustices endured by generations, leaving students with neither an incentive nor a reason to work for a future with justice and equity. You, our students, deserve to live your dreams by experiencing education to its fullest. I often talk about the work of Ida B. Wells. She was one of our nation's earliest civil rights leaders. And she taught us that the way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them. That's what we must do. We've got to shine that light of truth together. I know that we can, and I know that we will.
Thank you, Becky. I couldn't agree more. Randy, would you kindly tell us what you think about in terms of the role of education, the role of race and culture in education and how it should impact education? Could you give us your views on that?
Sure. I mean, I go back to, and I'm so glad to be with my dear friend Becky, and I go back to, frankly, what de Tocqueville said about this country, which is, one, and I start as a social studies teacher. So I start in terms of thinking about it historically. This was a country that was both one that prized its freedom and celebrated its diversity. And both of those things are really important for a country to thrive. It's not one without the other, it's both. And every time we take a turn to try to suppress or to try to cancel the great diversity that we have in the United States, we take a road backwards instead of forwards. Yes, is it scary sometimes to have, to be with people who are not like each other? Of course, but this is what our future is. This is what we need to do. So culture and race should be celebrated. Diversity should be celebrated. It should be embraced. It should be one of the things that are empowering. And unfortunately, this is a moment of time, whether it's because of the economic inequalities in America, whether it's because of the huge kind of change in the economy that tech has ushered in, whether it's because our country will be majority non-white over the course of the next 50 years, whatever this is, we have this moment of grave trepidation and grievance that has led to a very negative, a very polarized and negative environment. And what this will mean unfortunately, is that in this great nation of ours right now, we have this road between will we continue to be a multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy, or will we turn to autocracy, which was what other nations did when they faced this question about moving forward and embracing our diversity or being fearful of it. So I start with talking about democracy, but the hope here is our children, because what we see in younger generations is more of a facility with, an understanding of, an embracing of all we are, both our own individual heritages as well as other heritages. And ultimately, what we need to do, and this is what I heard Becky say so articulately and so profoundly, is that we need to bring to children the education that they deserve. They are our future. They are who will make and decide the great questions of what we are like as a country, of the bounty of this country, of the fulfillment, the joy, the destiny, the freedom, the justice, the opportunity. But what we do as educators is that we have to bring those opportunities to them so that they can partake in it. And that is who we are as educators. Every public school should be a place that parents want to send their kids. Every public school should be a place that educators want to be. Every public school should have the opportunities for kids to thrive. And so that is both about excellence and about equity. That is regardless of geography or demography. So what that means is that if we need to feed kids, we need to feed kids. If kids don't have the tech opportunities, the devices, the internet, we need to make sure they have it both at home and in school. We need to help, because of COVID, with kids' recovery, social, emotional, as well as academic. We need to make sure that schools are safe and welcoming. And we have to do this for all kids. I'm sick and tired of hearing that a kid who's in the suburbs can get everything he or she or they want or need, but a kid who is growing up in rural America, where you don't have a science teacher, that child can't get what he or she or they need, or a child in an urban center, has to suffer through a school that is still crumbling and doesn't have the ventilation that school needs. If we believe in our children, then part of our responsibility is not just to say to teachers, go try to do everything you need to do, regardless of what the situation is. We need to make sure that we get kids the small classes they need, the guidance counselors they need, the nurses that they need, the English language learner supports that they need. We need to do this for kids. That's why both unions focus on how do we have community schools with wraparound services? How do we actually create the equity that's needed? How do we make sure that kids in urban or rural settings have the AP courses that are needed? How do we change the assessment situation and the accountability situation? So it is about what kids need to know and be able to do, as opposed to some tests that were designed 30 or 40 years ago.
Correct.
This is about all of that.
Thank you. That's a really comprehensive answer, and I really appreciate that. I'm going to turn back to, thank you so much, Randy, turn back to Becky and ask Becky, so there's been, in the New York Times very recently, there was a whole article by J. Caspian King talking about the books that were getting canceled, the books that were getting added, and there was this back and forth and anger around how do the books get canceled? How do the books get introduced? Who should have a voice? What's the decision process for doing that? And how can we improve it so there's less anger about what our children are exposed to or not? Can you help us with that, Becky?
So, Yvette, there's a lot of misinformation that is circulating. I know you're surprised.
Yes.
In the media and social and print media about what is actually happening and what has happened and processes for determining what our students learn. And we have been very clear from the beginning. It is an inclusive process that involves educators and communities, families, as within each state, we develop the standards. And then from the standards, develop curriculum. And so this is not new for us, that we have realized that our standards and our curriculum needed to embrace the diversity that Randy was talking about. And so we've been at this for a long time to figure out what that looks like. We have been working very, very hard in terms of our preparation for our aspiring educators, making sure that they had the cultural competency skills, making sure that they're learning about the diversity that is this country, so that they have the training, and then our veteran educators, that they have the professional development, so they are continuing to learn. And they come together within their communities and they determine what that curriculum is. And it is available for all to see. So this is not new information. People are making things up. I know you're shocked by that.
Very.
We have a very inclusive process that led to the standards and curriculum that we teach from. And it's one of the things we've talked to our educators about. Randy's right. This did have a chilling effect in those, not only in the states where these laws were passed, but in other states as educators across the country are looking at that. And as unions, we did a couple of things. First of all, we were very clear. We were going to stand up for, speak out for, defend our members to be able to teach the truth, because they were teaching from an adopted standards and curriculum adopted by the very states that passed these laws, by people who never read their standards or curriculum. We have been standing by them in doing that. And then the other thing we've been hard at doing is making sure that people know what's in the law, because people are writing laws that have never spent a day in a classroom, and they have no idea what they're talking about, and they make no sense whatsoever, and really have minimal impact on what our educators are teaching from day to day. But one of the things that I want to make clear, a couple of things I want to make clear, that what we need from parents who, by the way, let me just say, I need to say this for a moment. I'm a parent, I'm a grandparent, 2 beautiful grandbabies. Oh. And most of our educators are parents, right? And this false division that the media is spewing across this country about the division between parents and educators, just not true, not true. You see, salacious things on the news or read about it, but no, not true. And so we're working together, because here's what I know. Parents want their children to be the leaders of a just society. And they know that can't happen if they don't have a rich and diverse curriculum that our educators are teaching from, and that our educators are prepared to teach that curriculum. And one other thing I want to be clear about, because we talk a lot about honesty in education and teaching the complete history. I talk about that a lot. But the other thing my dad did was made sure that I understood that it wasn't only important for me to understand the history, but it was important for me to understand how the history of this country tied to the present, to our current reality, because we want our students to understand that history so they can be the critical thinkers we need them to be, the problem solvers they need them to be, so that we need them to be, so that they can help us build this country that actually lives up to its highest ideals, right? The poetry at the beginning of our Constitution, we the people, Yvette, it is we the people, all of us have that right? We have that right. And so when we think about what these students who are joining us, what yet they need to learn and know and be able to do, it's all about developing those critical thinking skills so they can be those problem solvers, so that we can finally become that nation that we all aspire, help create this nation that we all aspire for it, that we will finally become, or at least get closer to being that more perfect union. So I just wanted to be clear. So we all need to come together. It is our shared responsibility. Educators can't do it by ourselves. It's our shared responsibility to come together, to stand up for our students so that they have the opportunity to learn and grow and thrive and ask tough questions of us and wrestle in all of that so that they can be those leaders of a just society.
Thank you, Becky. That was a wonderful answer. Thanks so much. So following up on that very thought, the challenge of all these stakeholders, you have parents, school psychologists, educators, unions, the concern for quality in teaching and learning. So I'm going to turn to Randy now to ask, so what's the constructive way to get these folks on the same page? And can you talk a little bit about this fear around the CRT, which has been way blown out of proportion and has become, sadly, I think, a distraction because of the way it's being couched. But I'd like Randy to take that on, if you could share that with us. What is your perspective?
So let me just say hallelujah to everything that Becky just said. And so what's happened here is, let's be clear. Whether it's right or wrong, K-12 teachers do not actually teach the analysis of critical race theory in kindergarten through high school. I frankly learned it. I'm both a lawyer and a social studies teacher. I actually learned the critical race theory analysis when I was in law school. It is just like other analyses. It is a legal theory to decipher whether or not there is either an intentional or unintentional effect of racism that go through our laws. And I start there because this is not it's not a scary concept. It's just like in medicine, there are concepts about how you deal with heart disease. In law, there are concepts of how you deal with legal issues. But what happened here is that we have had a reckoning with racism in the aftermath. This is my theory of the case here. In the aftermath of George Floyd's murder at the hands of a police officer, and that kids in whose teacher is actually a member of both Becky's and mine, the kids took video of that horrible murder, and it frankly went around the United States, and real questions about whether or not there was a racial intent by this police officer by having his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck for 7 to 8 minutes. And there were a lot of conversations in white households about looking at this and saying, this is the racism that people of Hispanic heritage, this is a racism that African Americans have talked about for years. Now, is that right that that happened in 2020 and that's the first time somebody had a conversation? No, of course that's not right. But you could see that there was, and you could see it in the rallies and the demonstrations after Mr. Floyd's murder, how integrated they were. Young and old, white, Black, Latino, gay, straight, you could just, indigenous nation, you could just see that. And there was a hope at that moment that maybe we could actually start seeing each other in a real way in a way that was multiracial and multi-ethnic. And then what happens? All of a sudden, Christopher Rufo and all these people take a term that nobody knows. I mean, who knows what CRT means?
Right.
And use it to destroy that. We need to make sure that every child feels safe and welcome. A white child, a black child. Safe and welcome doesn't mean that we don't teach about history, about the tremendous warriors who have helped create change, which has happened in every generation. So what do we do in K through 12? We teach history. We teach about struggle. Struggle started this great country. The revolution was struggle. So we teach about all the struggles, and we try to do it in an age-appropriate way based upon honest history and fact. And as Becky said before, it also helps create the critical thinking and thinkers of today and tomorrow. This is a mark of excellence in education if we're actually helping kids think how to think and also deal with conflict for themselves and with others. So my fear is that what's happening right now, because you saw in the aftermath of 1/6, you saw an intensity on changing laws so that teachers could not even teach about that insurrection, that we couldn't teach about what is uncomfortable. And a lot about what happens in America is uncomfortable. Our strength comes from overcoming it. So that's what this battle is about right now. And I thank God that the most Americans, when they are asked the question about, do we want our kids to know honest history and accurate history, they will say yes. The enemy right now is misinformation and disinformation and attributing disrespect to the process of teaching and learning. And in fact, one of the things that we just did as a union this week is this in January is Media Literacy Week. And because I know we're taping this in a different time than it's being shown. But during Media Literacy Week, the AFT has just bought this tool against misinformation called NewsGuard that is now going to be available for every teacher we represent, frankly, every teacher who wants it. And it is basically like a nutritional label, a tool against misinformation so that we can help deal with kids discerning fact from fiction. But at the end of the day, I say this as a social studies teacher and as a patriot, we need to make sure our kids can know and deal with the history of this country and the current events of this country.
Thank you. I think there's such an oversimplification on the part of the media and others who simply have decided that what we're trying to do is to say all the white children should feel guilty and in fear of the bad things they did, and everybody else should feel like a victim. No, we have no victims. We're not educating victims. I think that is such a poor, horrendous kind of way of looking at it. And I know that with your help and Becky's help, we're going to correct this because I think it's pulling us apart in ways that are tragic. When I was a little girl, we had a section for current events. And I expect you all to continue to teach me current events. And it happens to be that sometimes it's telling a story that's not very beautiful about our people and our country. But that's something we should learn from and not run away from. So now I want to turn to Becky and ask that she tell us, you know, one of the things that these naysayers have created a buzz about is, oh my goodness, our children are already so far behind in reading and math and in science. We need to have them catch up. So if, God forbid, we should teach them about the current events or what's really happening in the country, well, our kids will just get dumber. Could you talk about your wonderful ideas that I'm sure both unions share around what do we do to help our kids catch up? Are there innovations or pilots or something that people don't know about that you could share with us, Becky?
So first, I want to talk about the framing of the conversation we're having right now, 2 years in to a pandemic, where our students' lives have been disrupted continuously. The level of uncertainty and loss and despair is real. And like with everything else, Yvette, and you know this to be true, all of society's ills always find their way to our schoolhouse door, right? And so whether our students were learning virtually like they were at the beginning of the pandemic, or moving toward hybrid, or learning in person as most of them are now, it doesn't change the fact that our students' well-being has to be the very first thing that we talk about and we address. If our students are suffering from trauma, they can't learn. If they don't have the supports for the mental health issues that, quite honestly, many of them that was there before, and we didn't have the resources for counselors and psychologists and social workers and all those things, that's not new. But the pandemic, just like with everything else, the pandemic just made it worse. And who did it make it worse for? And it goes back to something that Randy said that I thought about when she was sharing, was here, you know, in addition to our students, Randy, watching the murder of George Floyd, as they're experiencing this, the impact of COVID and all of the crises it spawned, the healthcare crisis, the food crisis, the housing crisis. We have more students who are homeless now. The economic insecurity, they're watching. They see that it's disparately impacting some and not others. And they see who those folks are, right? They know that the pandemic itself, COVID-19, has disparately impacted our Black and Brown and Indigenous communities. More of their family members are dying. More of their family members are severely ill. More of their family members are losing their jobs or making decisions to go to their jobs and put themselves in harm's way. And so they're watching these disparities that exist in every one of our social systems. And then for our students, compound on each other to have this disparate impact. And so as educators, that's the very first thing we have to address. We have to address their mental health, their social and emotional well-being. We've got to do that first. Because if we don't do that, then we know that the academic learning is not going to happen. Of course, we're concerned about our students being prepared to take those next steps, whatever that is in their educational journey. Whether my son, my son, my grandbaby, I do think he is mine. What can I tell you? My grandson who started 4th grade this year, whether he was ready after his 3rd year being in virtual learning, whether he was ready to go into 4th grade, whether that high school student is ready to go on to college, we do need to be concerned about whether they are prepared. And so we were very concerned. And Randy and I came together last year and had lots of deep conversations about that. And we came up with a document that set a framework for principles that we would both work from, learning beyond COVID. And we talked about, focusing resources on the students that needed them the most. We talked about what I just said, those mental health issues. We talked about what we called accelerated learning, so that we could think about, restructuring our days and how we would maybe, we both did, provide resources and support throughout the summer for those students that we identified had gaps. And whatever those gaps were, social gaps, because we had a lot of students coming back, our teachers would say to us, they don't know how to do school. They don't know how to do school, right? So even
Right.
those gaps, but academic gaps, all of those things. So we worked over the summer with accelerated learning. And one of the things that we have been exploring is, which is not new, the science of learning is not new, but how we integrate the social, emotional, and academic learning to help accelerate that learning. So intensified tutoring, things that we know, way back. You remember reading recovery? I mean, that was like decades ago. And we went away from that, right? Because we didn't have the resources. So we gave up on it, but it had all those elements. So we tried to bring those elements back. And most especially that we fought for the resources. We fought to get the passage of the American Rescue Plan so that all resources for all of those things would be available to our schools. And so all of those things are aimed at the whole student, and embracing them. And we know that as educators, we can't do that by ourselves. That's why we at the NEA invested millions of dollars into expanding community schools across this country so we could surround students and their families, right, with those resources and supports they need so they can continue to learn and grow and thrive.
Thank you so much. I feel like we need a public service announcement about the wonderful work that you are both doing and leading in your organizations, because we hear a lot of why can't we figure this out? Public schools are essential to our democracy. They are absolutely crucial, and we have to support them, help them, because you're dealing with the most important cohort in the world, our children. So here's what some people say, and I know that it's very complicated, but I want to give you both of you the opportunity to talk to it. So we know that public schools are essential. Then we look at these other experiments, such as the Harlem Zone by Jeffrey Kennedy and Kennedy, and also Dr. Stephen Perry, the Capital Prep schools. This isn't nothing new to either of you, but people will say, why have those experiments managed to create success with high school students from those schools going to college and doing very well, exceptional rates? I hear and read that you're doing community schools, that you're bringing in the services that the children need, which, could be medical, mental, all kinds of wonderful things. So how do you respond to people saying, why can't we just get this right by looking at what works and replicating it in some way? And that's something I'd like you both to talk about. Maybe we'll start with Randy, and then Becky, I want to hear what you have to say. Thank you.
So I think it would probably surprise you that Jeff Kennedy and I actually did several things together during the pandemic, or during parts of the pandemic, to actually bring forward the things that do work, like community schools and wrapping services around and having that kind of integrated service model within a city or a community or a rural area, things like that. Some of it requires resources, some of it requires will. Both Becky and I have said we need to have thousands and thousands of community schools. And then you have like the politics in San Francisco, where they're actually cutting community schools, with the San Francisco superintendent and the mayor refuse to actually apply for the money that California now has available for community schools and is cutting it. So there's politics that get involved in terms of, even when you have a model that works, you have money like the superintendent, like the governor in California is willing to do, and yet the powers that be don't apply to that. So it's not simply a matter of replicating what works, it's also having the will to do what works in a situation like that. But then you also have to actually have an academic environment that works as well. So as you talked about Steve Perry, I actually still run a charter school in the Bronx. It's called UniPrep. That charter school has had a 95 to 100% graduation rate, where our kids have gone to college for the last 6 to 10 years. Now, why does that what is that school? It's a union school. It has, the people are organized. We have, they are actually paid about 10% more than people who work in the rest of the New York City school system. It's a public school with a union contract. That's a very flexible kind of contract. Now, why does not get the kind of attention? Why does a Harvest Academy that's doing amazing work? Why do the newcomer schools that are doing amazing work, why do they not get that kind of attention? Because at the end of the day, what happens is we don't have we have a responsibility for all kids. And for us, it means that every single child, regardless of demography or geography, we are not going to be satisfied until we help every single child. So we don't have the luxury that a Steve Perry has to have one school that's doing great and say, okay, this is the model. There are things about those schools, whether it's Perry or whether it's Jeff Kennedy, that we should be using. But there are things about the public school system that we should be using as well. And that is the promise and the potential that every single child can thrive with the right resources. And ultimately, what happens is that the people who don't want to give us the foundation, don't want to give us the resources, don't want to actually, or don't want to pay the taxes, don't want to do those things, will pick out the privatization and the destabilization rather than saying, let's make sure we help all kids.
Thank you, Randy. And I want to turn to Becky because it's also compounded by, because our children, some of them don't have the resources that they deserve and need, there is more trauma, more emotional, perhaps behavior that interferes with the learning process. How can we reconcile the need for those children who are emotionally, who really need that kind of support, so that those disturbances or interruptions to the learning process become fewer and everybody can thrive, as you both have been saying? What would you advise, Becky? And please elaborate on anything that I've left out.
So a couple of things. I could not agree more with Randy and how she framed what both of our unions are doing and how we view charter schools. You know, we both push against, you know, the industry, the corporate industry of charter schools, where they're trying to make money off of our kids and closing them down and unaccountable, and which kids always get caught in the middle of that. Our students with special needs, our students living in poverty, all of those things happen. And so we continue that fight. But it goes back to something I said before, if we say all, then we need to mean all. It's all students. It's not a few that can go here, or because somebody started a school here, they happen to have access to that. That's not okay. That's not what we think about when we think about what public education must be in this country. When we talk about it as a common good and as the foundation of this democracy, it's got to be for all. And so we have many innovations that we need to learn from in those schools that actually have in them those pillars of when we talk about community schools. We were talking about the processes, systems, and structures to build and support and sustain collaboration. When we're talking about high quality curriculum that's diverse, when we're talking about a high quality teaching staff that's also diverse, which, by the way, you did not ask me this question, Yvette, but I cannot leave this space without making a plug to these incredible students. We need you to become teachers. We need you to do that. We need you to do that. We know we were experiencing, everyone's seeing the shortage in teachers, and not just teachers, bus drivers and food service workers across this country. And of course, we're seeing the decline in the numbers of our teachers of color coming into the profession and staying in the profession. So part of that, that's a pillar of community schools, that we have a diverse and high quality teaching force. So that's absolutely essential. And then we have those wraparound services, right? That we support our students with. I feel the need to say this, Yvette. Our students are amazing. They're amazing. You know, what our students did in Los Angeles to come together and demand the schools that all students deserve, quite extraordinary what they were able to accomplish. We need to listen to them. We need to create space for them. We need to honor the fact that, you know, I said leaders, I talked about them being leaders of a just society as though it was something for the future. I need to say in this space that I see you, I hear you, and you are leaders right now. You are the ones that are helping us to create that education system that ensures that not one, not some, but every one of our students, every one of them gets what they need and they deserve, not only today, but every single day. And I just want to thank you for that activism, for standing up, lifting up your voices and standing strong to get what you know you deserve. So I just needed to give a shout out to our students, Yvette.
Yes.
Yeah, they're not just our future. They are.
Yeah. I agree. I agree. And I also thank everyone in the audience, and I hope they will heed your words and your advice. They are the future. We need to see more people of color teaching, leading. There is absolutely no question that when our children see role models, people that look like me, people that look like them, leading the class, it makes a huge difference to their self-esteem, to their confidence. And the research is very clear that those children typically go on to complete school and then go on to higher education. So I want to thank both of you. This has been my privilege to spend time with those in the audience and with Becky Pringle and Randy Weingarten. It is just a privilege to know of your work and to have this opportunity to moderate this panel. And let's all get involved, whatever it is, to mentor, to do an internship, to advise, to encourage. And as I said in the beginning, also, if you want the learning platform that we have for entrepreneurs, which is how the world is moving, lonelyentrepreneur.com, please, those are free resources for the entrepreneurs, and we are getting corporate to sponsor those privileges. So everywhere you look, people are trying. We want you to be part of the solution because we don't want to be the problem, and we are not victims. So thanks so much. Have a wonderful day, ladies. I really appreciate your time and your marvelous work.